Welcome to this episode of Political Podcast. Here I'll discuss very briefly about the demonstrations and protests happening in France over the proposed pension reforms, or rather should I say the past pension reforms, for it has been passed in the parliament. And my friend, this bill on pension reforms has been passed in the parliament without being put to vote. Yeah, shocked. Please understand that the parliament is the law-making authority or the body in any country. And this bill was passed in the parliament without being put to vote by invoking an article 49.3 of the French Constitution. Moreover, let's understand what this bill was all about. The retirement age of government employees in France is presently 62 years. And this bill has raised that age to 64 years. In other words, it will be saving the government's expenditure on pension payments to the pensioners in between 62 and 64 years of age. And the government has calculated how many millions of such pensioners would have existed had this reform not been effected, and the amount of money that the government exchequer will save. But then there are a whole lot of protests. Why put the stab on the backs of the old people who have been working the entire lives? Why not save money somewhere else? The people deserve retirement, the people deserve pensions, and you're just stripping them off from what they deserve. So there are lots of protests, and trade unions and labor unions have been protesting against this move of the government. So in order to understand this in its entirety, a very brief understanding of the polity of France is required. For those of my friends who are not in France or who do not belong to France, they might have a different perception. If you're in the United Kingdom or India or any other country with a parliamentary system of government, there you have the Prime Minister as the strongest person. And the president is either not existing or is just ceremonial in nature. If you are in a country such as the United States, you have a presidential form of system. There is no prime minister, there are no ministers at all. So you have the president who is the boss. But in countries such as France or Russia or maybe even Sri Lanka, you have semi-presidential forms of polity, wherein there is president, there is prime minister, and both of them share powers, which are quite substantial. And in the case of France, the powers were comparable till the Fifth Republic under General de Gaulle made the president much stronger. Because earlier, the legislators, the members of the parliament in France were elected directly by the people, at least the lower house. But the president was indirectly elected. But after the amendment, the president is now directly elected by the people of France, and this gives him a lot of legitimacy. And therefore, the president is quite powerful in France. Let me also understand the role of the president insofar as appointing the prime minister is concerned. The prime minister is the head of the government, whereas the president is the head of the state as well as the executive. And the president appoints such prime minister who he believes enjoys the confidence and majority of the parliament. Now, it is not immediately necessary for the prime minister to prove his majority on the floor of the parliament, but in the case he loses the majority by way of no confidence, then the president must remove that prime minister, remove the ministers and appoint a new set of ministers and prime minister. So, this is the entire system. The Parliament of France has two chambers. It's bicameral in nature. The lower house is called the National Assembly, has ministers, or rather members of parliament called deputies. All of them are directly elected from their respective districts, whereas the president is directly elected from the entire country. And then you have the Senate, the upper house, with indirectly elected members. So this is the basic structure. And we see how powerful the president is, because he is the one who is appointing the prime minister. And if the prime minister loses the confidence of the lower house, then the president can remove the prime minister. But no one can remove the president unless he has some criminal impeachment. Similarly, in the case of Russia, it's a very similar system. The lower house is called the Duma, but there the president is even more powerful, because even if the lower house, the Duma, passes a no confidence motion against the prime minister and other ministers, the government in general, if the president of Russia doesn't want, he can refuse this no confidence proposal of the parliament. If he wants, he can accept it. In other words, the parliament is literally powerless in the face of the president of Russia. That's the power of the president there. Now, in the case of France, we have to understand this thing, that a certain bill was introduced by the Prime Minister, Elizabeth Borne, in the French lower house of the parliament, the National Assembly, and that was this bill on pension reforms. It was controversial. There was about 175 hours of debate and discussion in the parliament, and also a lot of debate in the media, among the people in general, and a lot of discussion happened. And then the government was apprehensive that because of so much of anti-forces, the bill might not be passed in the parliament because there are lots of opposers. And therefore, the Prime Minister smartly invoked this Article 49.3 of the Constitution, whereby the vote of the parliament can be bypassed. And this is literally a free right given to the Prime Minister and indirectly to the President to pass whatever they deem fit. Now, what will happen is that the Parliament is not completely powerless, because even though the bill has been passed, they have 24 hours to pass the no confidence motion. And they did. Two political factions within the lower house National Assembly, they introduced the no confidence motion. And both of them failed, unfortunately for the opposition parties and fortunately for the French government. Those no confidence motions failed. But had the no confidence motion been passed, it would have been binding upon the President of France, Emmanuel Macron, to dismiss the Prime Minister and her Council of Ministers and form a new cabinet, form a new Prime Minister. What he could also do, and what he would have done, as experts say, is to dissolve the very National Assembly. Because the National Assembly has made such a move, the President had all the powers to dissolve the National Assembly. Had he done that, the President's seat would remain unaffected. His ratings are definitely going down among the French people as of today, but his seat would have remained unaffected. However, the members of the parliament all would lose their seats because the National Assembly would be dissolved and re-election would be held. A lot of members of parliament don't want to take that risk. Why would they vote for the no confidence and lose their own seat tomorrow? And therefore, a number of MPs, a number of deputies who opposed the proposed pension reforms actually did not go against the French Prime Minister in the no confidence motion. And that's why the no confidence motions failed. That's why we still have the same Prime Minister and cabinet still, and that's why the protests and demonstrations have taken a new light. Now, if we carefully try to understand what the French government and the French president are trying to say, they are trying to say that it's a bold decision, and they are trying to put forth courage in the face of resistance, that because no reforms were made, all the way status quo was maintained and maintained and maintained, the entire economy became stagnated sort of, and new creative reforms are required, otherwise, in the words of the French government, the system will go bust. So that's why these reforms are necessary. This is how they are saying it. And if we analyze that the retirement age in most European nations, 67 years, 68 years, even 70 years. But here it's 62, making it 64 is inviting so much of protests. And this is not to say that the move by the French government is right. I'm nobody to say that the move was right or wrong. There are very genuine concerns among the population, especially among the older population, those in their 50s, because they are definitely at a loss, because they'll have to lose their 2 years of pension, and the retirement is also being increased. And the debate is intense. I mean, I can't compress the pros and cons on both sides of the table in this short podcast. You'll have to really see and watch the different debates on French television and French media, French newspapers, and you have to talk to some of your French friends to really understand the crux of the matter. But this is a very synoptical, summarized form of what I understood as a person from another country. And I always try to compare the polities. For example, in the case of United States, we have the president who is the boss. There is no prime minister. And even there, just like the both houses of the parliament, the president is also directly elected by the people. So he is quite powerful there. And in the case of countries like the United Kingdom and India, the prime minister, even though he's not directly elected by the people, the prime minister is the boss. So in such cases, if a no confidence motion is passed and the prime minister has to go down, then the country goes down. In this case, in France, even if the no confidence motion would have been passed, the president would have stayed. And therefore, the system is so designed that the prime minister becomes the first scapegoat of any problem that comes. The president, in the case of France or Russia, has this one layer of immunity, one layer of protection, as you can call. So these things are really testing the limits of my knowledge in political science. Meet you in another podcast with some interesting updates if I get, and definitely some really academic questions. Do comment your opinions, do comment your thoughts about this entire state of affairs, and let me know if you need a podcast on any other topic. So till then, stay tuned to News and Statics, to Political Podcast. Meet you all next time. Bye-bye.